You know that kid who always seemed older than everyone else in the room? Not just a little older, a lot. Not because they were smarter than the others, not because they were trying to impress anyone, but because life handed them things that kids were never supposed to carry in the first place. Maybe that kid was you, and maybe you've never had the right words for it until now. And if it was, this video is going to feel uncomfortably accurate in ways you didn't expect. Because today we're talking about the psychology of people who grew up too fast, and what it quietly does to a person long after childhood is over and everyone has moved on. Here's the thing nobody actually says out loud about these people. They didn't grow up fast because they were strong. They grew up fast because they had no other choice. Strength had nothing to do with it. There was no one else to be the adult in the room, so they looked around and became one. At 8 years old, at 10, at 12, and their brain adapted to that brilliantly and painfully. Growing up too fast is not always poverty or visible chaos. Sometimes it is much quieter than that. It's being the emotional support system for a parent who should have been yours instead. It's making sure your younger sibling ate dinner because no one else in the house was checking. It's learning to read the mood of a room before you ever learn to read a single book. It's knowing exactly when to disappear quietly and when to hold absolutely everything together. Psychologists call this parentification, when a child takes on adult emotional or practical responsibilities. And research shows it rewires how the brain develops in ways that follow a person for decades. The first thing that changes is their entire relationship with the concept of safety. Most kids feel safe by default. These kids learn that safety is something you earn and maintain constantly. Their nervous system never fully relaxes because relaxing used to mean something important got missed. And that hypervigilance that kept them okay as a child slowly becomes anxiety as an adult. From the outside, they look completely fine. More than fine, actually. Capable. Even impressive to watch. They hold jobs, manage crises, support everyone around them without ever once complaining about it. But inside, there is this constant low hum, a quiet waiting for something to go wrong at any moment. Because in their experience, things always eventually did. The good never lasted long enough. When children are forced into adult roles too early, the prefrontal cortex develops differently than it should. They become exceptional at planning ahead, anticipating consequences, and managing complex emotions under pressure. Skills that most adults spend years trying to learn, these people had already mastered by middle school. But there is a cost to all of that. There is always a cost. Nothing comes without one. The part of childhood that was supposed to be spent playing, existing freely, being safe, that got skipped. And the brain remembers exactly what it missed, even when the person doesn't consciously think about it anymore. This shows up in a very specific way, in adulthood. They don't know how to rest without feeling guilty. Doing nothing feels wrong, dangerous, almost, like they must be forgetting something critically important. Because for years, stopping meant failing someone who was depending on them to keep going. So they stay busy, constantly busy, not because they genuinely love being busy, but because stillness feels like a threat their body simply hasn't learned how to ignore yet. People who grew up too fast also often struggle to fully enjoy good things when they arrive, not because they don't feel happiness, but because joy was always followed by something difficult. So their nervous system quietly learned to treat good moments as the calm that comes before the storm. They hold happiness at a careful arm's length without even realizing they are doing it. Psychologists call this a disrupted reward response. The brain becomes deeply cautious about positive emotions because in early life, good things were unpredictable and almost always short-lived. So why trust them now? These people are typically the most loyal, giving, and attentive people you will ever meet in your life. They notice when you're off before you say a word. They show up without ever being asked to. They remember the small thing you mentioned once 3 months ago and quietly check in about it later. Because caring for others is the language they learned first, and they learned it completely and fluently. But ask them what they need. Sit down and ask them how they're really doing. Genuinely ask, and watch them completely shut down. Not dramatically, just quietly, like a door closing softly. Not because they don't have needs, but because having needs used to be a luxury they simply couldn't afford. Somewhere early on, they learned that their feelings were secondary, inconvenient, too much for the room. So they tucked those feelings carefully away and got on with the job of holding everything else together. And now as adults, they still do it automatically, without thinking, without even noticing they're doing it. Research shows these individuals often become what's called anxiously helpful. They give and give and give. But underneath all that giving is a deep fear. If I stop being useful, the people I love will leave. Because on some level, that is the story they were taught. Love was conditional on being functional. If you were helpful, you were kept. If you fell apart, you became a problem nobody wanted to deal with. So they make themselves indispensable in every relationship, and somewhere they started calling that love. And they are genuinely loving people. That part is completely real, and it runs incredibly deep in them. But underneath all of it is this quiet and heavy terror of ever being seen as a burden to anyone. They often feel like a stranger living inside their own body during moments of calm and peace, happiness, ease, stillness. These feel foreign, like wearing clothes that belong to someone else entirely, because their nervous system was built and calibrated for chaos, not for quiet, not for calm. And when life is actually okay, something deep in them keeps scanning for the danger that must be coming. Psychologists describe this as a kind of chronic low-grade trauma response that never fully switches off. The brain stays in mild alert mode permanently because that alert mode is what kept them safe for so long. And then there is the grief, the kind they rarely talk about, the grief for the childhood they never had. They see other adults be playful and spontaneous, and something very quiet and old aches inside them. Not jealousy exactly, more like a deep sadness for a version of themselves that never got to exist. The kid who got to make mistakes without consequences, who got to be wonderfully, carelessly irresponsible, who got to fall completely apart and actually have someone else step in and hold them together for once. That kid never really got to show up, and they feel that absence clearly even decades later. But here is where the story turns, because it has a different ending than most people expect it to. People who grew up too fast don't just carry wounds with them, they carry extraordinary and hard-earned wisdom. They have an emotional intelligence that is genuinely rare, not because they studied it or read about it, but because they lived it, processed it, survived it, and came out the other side still standing. They become the person other people call at 2 a.m. without question, not by accident, completely by nature. And slowly, some of them begin to learn the most radical and difficult thing they have ever attempted. How to receive care instead of only giving it. How to be still. How to believe they are allowed to be soft. They didn't grow up too fast because something was wrong with them, they were just capable enough to carry it. And that capacity doesn't go away, it just needs somewhere better to go. Subscribe if this finally said what you needed to hear.